My name is Iris Mallory. I turned 70 last winter. Though some mornings when I creak out of bed, it feels closer to 90. Since Elias passed, it has been just me, and the endless rhythm of raising Damien's children as if I had been handed a second motherhood I never asked for. People at church like to say I'm blessed to have the little ones around. Blessed, they call it, when my own life slipped quietly off the rails years ago. Elias and I once dreamed of retiring at our cabin by Lake Erie. It was a modest place, peeling paint, creaky dock, but it was ours. I pictured myself quilting on the porch, the water lapping below, and maybe making one last trip to the Maine coast we always talked about. But when Damien and Maribel needed a down payment for their house, I sold that cabin without hesitation. They never knew I had tied the deed to their mortgage too, keeping my name tucked quietly on the papers. I told myself it was temporary, that their home would feel like mine too. Instead, it became my prison. I was the one who woke the children at dawn, who packed lunches, who braided hair and checked homework. I spent my pension buying their sneakers, their notebooks, their groceries. Every evening, I carried laundry baskets up their narrow stairs, folding shirts until my hands ached. The house buzzed with life, but it wasn't mine. Sometimes I would walk past the church hall on Thursdays and hear laughter from the quilting circle I used to attend. I'd catch myself staring at the door, remembering the feel of fabric beneath my fingers, the easy company of women my age. Now my companions were cereal bowls left on counters, backpacks flung across the floor, and a sink that never emptied. I told myself it was love, and in some ways it was, but love had become chains. I kept silent, smiling for the children, swallowing the ache for the life Elias and I once promised each other. And when Damien and Maribel invited me to dinner one Sunday evening, I had no idea how completely that silence was about to break. The smell of roast chicken and buttered potatoes drifted through the house the moment I stepped inside. Maribel had set the table with more care than usual. Cloth napkins, candles, even a cake resting proudly on the counter. For a fleeting second, my heart lifted. Maybe, after all these years, they had finally noticed. Maybe this was their way of saying thank you for holding their family together while they worked and rested. The children buzzed around me like bees. Rowan tried to keep her brothers from spilling juice, while little Elsie crawled into my lap before I'd even settled in my chair. Their chatter filled the room, and I smiled despite the exhaustion tugging at my bones. I thought of the plays I had sat through, the illnesses I had nursed, the countless nights I had whispered lullabies when their parents were too tired. For a moment, I felt proud, even hopeful. Halfway through the meal, though, the air shifted. Maribel set down her fork, and Damien cleared his throat with the nervous excitement of a boy about to make a toast. He tapped his glass with a spoon and beamed at me. "Mom," he said, "we have big news." I froze. Fork midway to my mouth, Maribel leaned back, hand resting gently on her stomach. "Baby number 5 is on the way," she announced, her face glowing with satisfaction. The children erupted cheering, clapping, peppering them with questions. "Is it a boy? When will it come?" Rowan squealed. Dylan drummed the table. Even Elsie squeaked in delight. I sat perfectly still, my smile a mask. My heart pounded against my ribs, not with joy, but with dread. Another baby meant more sleepless nights, more diapers, more school runs, more years slipping away while I lived a life that wasn't mine. I wanted to clap with them, to share in their excitement, but instead, a knot twisted in my stomach until I could barely breathe. "Congratulations," I forced out, my voice thin. I lifted my glass as they cheered, but inside I whispered words no one could hear no more. And as laughter rang through the room, My mind was already racing toward the storm that dinner had set in motion. The alarm rings at 6, though I'm usually awake before it. By the time I reach Damien's house, the kitchen is already a battlefield. Bowls of half-eaten cereal litter the counter. Milk drips onto the floor, and Elsie clings to my leg in her pajamas. Rowan rushes around trying to corral her brothers, while Dylan complains about missing socks, and Caleb begs for something sweet. I step into the chaos without thinking. Sandwiches are packed, apples sliced, juice boxes lined up. I iron Dylan's shirt while reminding Caleb to brush his teeth. I braid Elsie's hair as she wriggles, then herd them all into the car. The drive to school is a chorus of bickering and humming, with Rowan sulking over a history project in the back seat. After drop-off, I head straight to the store. My Social Security check barely stretches. But the kids need notebooks, soap, fruit for lunches. I swipe my debit card and pray it doesn't overdraw. Back at the house, laundry waits in baskets stacked taller than me. I scrub stains, match socks, run the dishwasher twice. The hours slip away in chores no one notices. By mid-afternoon, I'm back in the car for school pickup. Homework time begins. Rowan needs help with algebra. Dylan forgot a science project due tomorrow. Caleb lost another permission slip, and Elsie refuses to eat dinner unless I sing her favorite song. I juggle each demand until the sun sinks, then tuck them into bed, humming lullabies with my back aching. When Damien finally walks in, he drops his boots by the door and flips on the television. Maribel scrolls her phone, barely glancing at me. No one asks about my day. No one thanks me. I think of Elias, then his voice years ago, promising, "One day you'll travel without burden." That day never came. I haven't left Columbus in over 10 years. Instead, I fold towels in a house that isn't mine, living a life I never chose, and wondering how many more mornings I will wake to the same captivity before something finally breaks. It was late. The children finally upstairs. The house quieter than it ever seemed during the day. I was wiping crumbs from the table when Damien cleared his throat. "Mom, can you sit down a minute?" His tone carried a weight I didn't like. Maribel was beside him, arms folded, lips pressed tight. I eased into a chair, towel still in my hand. Damien glanced at her, then back at me. "With the new baby coming, we've been talking. Things are going to get harder, and we need more help." I waited, heart heavy, already knowing the shape of what he was about to say. Maribel leaned forward. "You're here most of the week already. The kids rely on you more than us. It makes sense to make it official. You can handle the school runs, the meals, the laundry, everything." I stared at them, stunned. Official? As if the last decade of my life had been nothing but trial runs. Damien shifted in his chair. "And since you're practically living here half the time, we think it's fair you contribute. Rent, groceries, just a few hundred a month." The words hung in the air like a slap. $400 out of my $1,450 pension. I thought of the careful budget I kept: medications, utilities, scraps of groceries I still bought for their pantry. How many times had I slipped new sneakers into a cart when Dylan outgrew his, or paid for Rowan's field trip without a word? I pressed my lips together, heat rising to my face. They weren't asking. They were binding me tighter, using my love as a leash. I wanted to shout the truth that the very house they sat in still bore my name on the deed, that I had sold my dreams of a lakeside cabin so they could plant roots here. Instead, I stayed silent, towel clenched in my hands, heart pounding in my chest, already knowing I could not survive much longer under their terms. That night, I couldn't bring myself to drive straight home. Instead, I pulled into the cul-de-sac and parked in front of Claudine Roche's porch. She was already out there, a shawl draped over her shoulders, sipping tea like she always did after sunset. Her light glowed soft against the dark, a small beacon in a neighborhood that often felt too heavy for me to breathe. She looked up as I walked over. "You've got that face. Iris," she said gently. "The one that says you've been carrying too much." I sat beside her, the wooden chair creaking beneath me, and the words spilled out how Damien and Maribel wanted me to pay rent, how they wanted to lock me into endless care. Claudine didn't interrupt. She just sipped her tea, eyes steady, letting me empty the ache from my chest. When I finally stopped, she leaned back. "Iris, you raised your kids. This isn't your job." Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through my guilt. I swallowed hard. "But they rely on me, the children. They need parents, not a stand-in mother," she said firmly. Then her mouth quirked. "And don't forget your name is still on that deed. You sold your cabin. Remember, you've had more power in this all along than you've let yourself believe." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd tucked that truth so far away. I'd almost forgotten it myself. A deed with my name still printed bold. A house they thought was theirs alone. Driving home later, the thought echoed in me. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of strength. That night, I lay in bed imagining what freedom might look like: my quilting circle, the walking club, maybe even a train ride east to visit my sister in Maine. Dreams that had once felt impossible now hovered close enough to touch. A week later, I found myself at the public library instead of Damien's kitchen. I told him I had errands, and for once it wasn't a lie meant to cover another chore. I settled at a corner computer and typed Senior Apartments, Columbus, Ohio. The screen filled with listings, small one-bedroom units, income-based housing, even a few with community centers. I wrote down numbers, circled addresses, and did the math in my notebook. My pension barely stretched. But if I took on a little part-time work, maybe I could manage. For the first time in years, the idea of a door that locked just for me felt real. That evening, Maribel caught me on my way out. "Friday night," she said casually. "We'll be late. So you'll stay over." I shook my head. Pulse quickening. "No, not overnight anymore. I'll help in the afternoons. But I go home at night." Her eyes narrowed. "What else do you have going on? You're retired. You have all the time in the world." The words stung. But I held my ground. "I need my evenings," I said quietly, though inside my heart was pounding. She turned away in a huff, muttering about how ungrateful I was. I grabbed my bag, ready to leave, when Rowan stepped into the hallway. She looked older than 14 just then, worry shadowing her face. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you leaving us?" The question cut deeper than Maribel's anger ever could. I crouched down, cupping her cheek. "Sweetheart, I will always be here for you. That doesn't mean I have to sleep under this roof every night. Loving you doesn't mean giving up my life." Her eyes shimmered, but she nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she should have to at her age. I pulled her into my arms, breathing in the faint scent of her shampoo, holding her tighter than I meant to. That night, when I drove back to my little house, the silence felt different, less like emptiness, more like space I had claimed. But I knew the storm was far from over. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind when I expected only laundry and homework battles. I had just finished folding shirts when Damien called me into the kitchen. His jaw was tight, and Maribel stood beside him, an envelope clutched in her hand. "We had $300 in here," she said sharply. "It's gone. And it disappeared right around the time you started taking things home." The words struck like a slap. I blinked at her, unable to make sense of what I was hearing. "You think I took it?" Damien shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away. "You're the only one here during the day, Mom. If you needed help, you should have just asked." My chest tightened, After years of paying for shoes, notebooks, groceries, after every quiet sacrifice, they thought me capable of stealing. My voice shook. I would never. Maribel crossed her arms. Then explain where it went. Damien cleared his throat. Maybe we should call the police. Let them sort it out. The room spun. My own son ready to put me under suspicion, to treat me like a criminal. I gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. Before I could speak, Rowan appeared in the doorway, pale but steady. Grandma didn't take it, she said, her voice trembling but clear. I saw you. Mom, you put the envelope in your purse last week after shopping. Silence fell. Maribel's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening then closing. Damien stared at the floor. Shame written across him, but he didn't defend me. I felt something inside me crack. Not from anger, but from clarity. My hands shook as I picked up my bag. This house is not my home anymore, I whispered. Rowan's eyes followed me as I walked out the door. The air colder than I'd ever felt it. My heart finally certain that I could not stay bound here any longer. I signed the lease with hands that trembled, though not from doubt. The apartment was small, just one bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a balcony hardly big enough for 2 chairs. Still, when I turned the key in the lock for the first time, the space felt like it exhaled for me. Sparse as it was, it belonged to me alone. I furnished it slowly. A table from the thrift store, its legs scuffed but sturdy, became my anchor. I set Elias's photo on top and planted geraniums in clay pots along the balcony. Watching those blooms open each morning reminded me that even neglected roots can flower again when given air and light. The first Thursday evening, I returned to the quilting circle at church. I was nervous, like a girl showing up late to class. But when the women saw me, they clapped, and someone pressed a square of fabric into my hands. The rhythm of needle and thread, the laughter and stories, reminded me I was still Iris. Not just a grandmother, not just a caretaker, but a woman with her own hands, her own voice. Claudine coaxed me into her walking club, 3 mornings a week around the park. My back protested, and I lagged behind at first, but each lap felt like a claim staked back on my own body. Breathing in the crisp air beside women my age, I felt alive in ways I hadn't in years. The nights were the hardest. The silence pressed heavy. No children arguing or doors slamming. No lists waiting on the counter. Yet as weeks passed, the guilt that once gnawed at me softened, replaced by something steadier peace. And in that quiet, I began to wonder what new storms might still find me. The phone rang one afternoon while I was trimming the dead leaves from my geraniums. Damien's voice was tight. Maribel had been put on bed rest. The pregnancy was fragile. "Mom, I can't do this alone," he said, desperation bleeding through his words. The old reflex tugged at me, the instinct to rush in, to carry everything without question. But Claudine's voice echoed in my mind. "You raised your kids. This isn't your job." I took a breath and steadied myself. "I'll help," I said slowly. "But on my terms. After school only. No overnights. And it lasts 3 months, no longer." He was silent a beat too long before muttering, "Fine." I knew it cost him to accept boundaries, but he had no other choice. That week, I returned, not as a live-in caretaker, but as a grandmother with limits. The kids looked relieved the moment I walked in, though I made it clear things would change. "We'll get through this together," I told them. "But you all have to help." Rowan took to the stove. Clumsy at first, but proud when she managed pasta without burning it. Dylan groaned about laundry. Yet soon enough, he was sorting colors and folding towels with more care than I expected. Caleb set the table each evening, experimenting with folded napkins like it was art. Even little Elsie, with her wild hair and stubborn streak, learned to put crayons back in their box and toys in their basket before bedtime. The house was still messy, the meals sometimes late, but the load no longer sat solely on my shoulders. Damien sulked in the background, boots heavy on the floorboards. But even he couldn't ignore the shift, and for the first time, I felt the balance tip toward me. Maribel delivered a healthy baby boy in late summer, though the house seemed to buckle under the weight of one more child. The crying was constant, the older kids restless, and Damien's voice on the phone carried the same pleading edge I'd heard too many times before. "Mom, we need you more than ever. Can't you just stay a little longer?" I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of my own refrigerator in my apartment. "No, Damien," I said gently but firmly. "I'll stop by when I can. But I won't move back in. This is your family to raise." The silence on the other end told me he hated the answer. But I didn't bend. My days remained mine. I kept my spot at the quilting circle, fingers steadying over fabric as laughter rolled around me. 3 mornings a week, I walked with Claudine and the other women, the ache in my back now a reminder that I was alive. Not a chain holding me down. My apartment stayed simple, but it held my books, my table, my geraniums blooming in stubborn defiance against every winter that had tried to silence me. I still gave, but differently. A bag of groceries slipped onto their porch now and then. A phone call to cheer Rowan before a big test. A $20 bill tucked into Dylan's hand for basketball fees. Elsie called me on video, proudly showing her baby brother's new smile. I loved them fiercely, but I no longer disappeared inside their needs. One evening, I sat on my balcony as the sun bled gold across the horizon. Roses I'd planted in pots swayed in the breeze, petals unfolding slowly, like my own life had begun to. I whispered to the quiet air, "I'm still a grandmother, but I'm also Iris again." And in that moment, I knew I had chosen love, but without surrender. When love demands your entire life, is saying no betrayal or the truest form of love.